just because you're not a leader right now doesn't mean you won't be a leader in the future, right? Just because you don't think you even have the capacity to lead right now doesn't mean you can't learn the skills, the behaviors.
It's said that if you stop being curious, you stop growing. I'm David Wiley. This is Dave Wants to Know. Leadership, it's something you hear about all the time. It's important at the job, it's important in your home, and it's important in the community. So when I recently attended the California Water Environment Association's annual conference in Sacramento, I saw a great presentation on leadership. And I asked the gentleman who gave that presentation to join us, and he kindly accepted. So with us today is Max Armenta, who's actually a senior civil engineer. Max, thanks for being with us.
Thanks, Dave. Yeah, nice to be on here. It's my first podcast.
I'm interested. How does a senior civil engineer in wastewater end up talking about leadership?
Yeah, I mean, you really have to be a leader in any of these managerial roles, or you'd hope for that, right? Because when you're managing people, you're really not managing the people, you're managing the tasks, you're leading the group. And so I started talking about leadership at the CWEA, California Water Environment Association conference, because it's a topic near and dear to my heart. We'll probably get into how I first started thinking about leadership actively. But at these conferences, there's a lot of technical sessions. On my day to day, I deal with very technical topics, but leadership is something that we all need to be thinking about actively if we want to make that difference in our community and in our organizations.
And that's what I thought was so valuable about your presentation is it just didn't apply to wastewater or to business, but like I'd said in the opening, you really can use it in any area of life, whether you're the boss at a big company or just working with family members or with neighbors or whatever. I think there's a lot to learn. So yeah, how did you get interested in leadership and how did that start to become a passion for you?
It started earlier when I was at UCLA. So this is my undergraduate experience. And I
Go
was
Bruins.
leading Go Bruins, right? We just came off of a big win, NCAA women's team, number
Yep.
one. They did great in the draft, by the way, if anyone's following WNBA. But bringing us back to the conversation, leadership started for me back at UCLA. And there were a lot of organizations I was a part of, but one was near and dear to my heart. That's the American Society of Civil Engineers. And that student group was about 300 people large. So it's a pretty large organization. There's a lot that's larger than a lot of small companies out there, right? And we had a board of about 20 members, and I was the president of that organization. And so during that year in particular, I got really fascinated with the topic of leadership. I was reading a lot of different books to help me think about how we lead people, how we show up for these organizations. And, that kind of kicked things off. From there, I led a concrete canoe project. So it's a very competitive nationwide competition, international actually now. And just kept that vein of leadership going and that interest in leadership going beyond undergraduate experience and all the volunteer organizations I've been a part of. And now that I'm in a leadership role formally at work, I'm really trying to take that skill set and bring it every day to my workplace.
So, who were some of the people that you were looking at for guidance when you were trying to learn leadership roles? Because getting thrown into the president of a large organization at a humongous university is a lot of responsibility and can be very intimidating.
Yeah, I think you find those people organically. I would always encourage people to just keep their eyes open, their ears open for something that resonates with them that they see in their day to day life. For me, it was Brooke Crow, Ryan Vanderlip. These are names that probably are not widely known, right? But they were just students that were older than me, but they were leading the organization, right? And I saw their type of leadership styles and how effective it was. They were different leadership styles, right? But both of them were very effective in leading this group. So those were some of the early leaders I had latched onto that were peers of mine. They're only 1 or 2 years older than me at the time. But since then, I find leaders in all aspects of my life, whether it's personally, right? People maybe that are family members or people now in my extended family. It could be people in my organization today, people in my past companies, or people in these volunteer organizations like CWEA. I find those leaders and their aspects of their leadership that I like to adopt, I latch onto. There might be other aspects that don't work so well for me. And I think it's really important to start thinking about that early if you do want to be a leader later in life, because you don't get the title of leader, right? If you're waiting to show up as a leader once you get the role of manager or senior or president, it's a little too late, right? And so I think it's really important to start leading from within your organizations even before you get that title.
You mentioned a lot of people who were close to you and people you knew. Were there books you're reading? Were there philosophers? Were there, some of the names we hear out there? Was anybody that you kind of tuned in and said, I like the way he thinks or she thinks?
Yeah, it's a bit dated now. Actually, I was in a book club and it was kind of controversial, the topic. I think some people didn't really jive with it. But How to Win Friends and Influence People by Dale Carnegie, really
That's a
enjoyed
big
that
one.
book. Yeah,
Yeah,
it's one of the first ones I got. It got me really thinking about this topic, how you influence and lead people. Seven Habits. So again, getting back to the classics, Seven Habits
right.
of Highly Effective People, also a good one. But from there, just I think really just digging in and reading widely is important. I read a couple of them recently, like The Dichotomy of Leadership. Really enjoyed that book. Brene Brown does great work. Dare to Lead is one of my favorites from her. So yeah, I think just reading widely. Those are just a list of a couple of them. I'm sure we'll get into more when we start to talk about the talk.
So yeah, your talk was about the four faces of leadership. And before I get into that, I thought it was interesting that you actually gave kind of a history of leadership, that the way we have viewed leadership, at least in the last 150 years, has evolved a little bit. Maybe you can kind of go over that a little bit.
Yeah. So as I was preparing for this talk, I thought, you know what, Max, you got to do your homework. And I took a class from UC Berkeley Extension.
Okay.
Our work at East Bay Mud, we encourage continued education, so every employee gets like a $3,000 stipend. In that class, there's a textbook that brought me through those different phases, right? And there's some research papers that are also summarizing this. The researchers love publishing, so they look at all the other papers that have been published, and we'll have a paper on those papers. And the phases that you're mentioning, what we'll talk about is it starts off with trait leadership. Really, these early researchers that were looking at how do we pick good leaders. From what I've read, it started off around World War I, right? They're looking at who are going to be the leaders that will be good for this war and after that. And there was this theory called the Great Man Theory, which starts off with a philosopher in the 19th century, the 1800s. I think that's the era. And so it really jumps off of, okay, there are some people who are just born great, and those are the people that have these traits. They're charismatic, right? They're outgoing. These are the types of people who are our leaders. That
The
isn't
Winston
really, yeah,
Although I was going to say, like the Winston Churchills or some of the generals from World War II that are still household names, and some of them became presidents, that kind of
absolutely.
person.
Yeah, think about George Washington, right? You think of these people usually, traditionally had been men of stature, right? That's why it's this great man theory. They're usually, I mean, if you look at our CEOs today, a lot of them are very tall. I think there is still some of that is just underlying in how we think about it and how we trust leaders today still.
But that evolved, I guess, after the World War II. We started seeing maybe a little different way of looking at leadership.
I think it was about the 1940s, and you start to look at what's being published. Now you start to see researchers looking at behavioral leadership. So there apparently was this shift, or we're no longer thinking traits decide everything. When you look at predicting the effectiveness of a leader, it's not just solely based on these traits. And so behavioral leadership starts to look at the behaviors of leaders, and that's focused on two main aspects. One is the tasks, so behaviors towards completing certain tasks, and then behaviors towards people, right? How you actually lead those people. And a fundamental change between trait leadership and behavioral leadership is it's not just something that's innate or you're born with. It's actually something that can be practiced and learned. And that's a shift that starts to happen in the
That
mid
was a big
1900s.
change because originally it was like you're born with it. These are men with these bigger than life kind of personalities and like stature, even as you mentioned. And now we're saying, oh, maybe some of these things can be learned.
Yeah. And that's kind of the evolution as we start to think of leadership and effective leadership, right?
And is that where we are now? Is that leadership can be learned, or has it changed since that time?
That's my belief, that leadership can be learned, right? And there's different philosophies. It has evolved though, right? Everything keeps building on itself. So there's the behavioral leadership, um, and then there's situational leadership. At least in the talk that I had given at the California Water Environment Association, that is the next evolution, kind of where I stopped in terms of the framework, before talking about the four phases of leadership. In the situational leadership, it says, yeah, leaders can learn behaviors and there are different types of behaviors that are important for leaders, but the situation also matters. So, the situation in terms of who are your followers, what's the context of the actual situation you're dealing with, and that will impact your leadership. So, it's external as well, right? And that requires a high level of emotional intelligence. That's where emotional intelligence starts to factor into leadership. It's really popular nowadays. I think you'd be hard pressed to find a great leader in today's society that doesn't know of emotional intelligence, right? Or hasn't heard of it.
So define that for me, because that maybe it's because of my age, but that could mean a lot of things to me.
Right. I think emotional intelligence, I don't have a concise definition, but I'll give you the four pillars of it that might be
Okay.
more effective, right? There's the ability to be self aware, there's the ability to self regulate, there's the ability to be socially aware, and then there's the ability to manage relationships, those external relationships. These are these four pillars of emotional intelligence. It was originally started from a paper, it was a term that was coined in a paper, and then it became a title of a paper, and then there was a book that was written on emotional intelligence. And that book, I believe it's Dan Goleman, that's what popularized emotional intelligence. And there's been more essays, papers, and books since then.
Can you kind of thumbnail each one of those points? So the first was self-awareness.
Yeah, self awareness. That's your ability to understand your emotions. For example, and there's a great quote in Seven Habits. I don't think it's actually attributed to the Seven Habits of Effective Leaders, but it talks about how in between the space of an action, so something you might say to me, and my reaction, there's this third space. And that's that in that space, we have the ability to choose how we react. That was
Mm.
actually really pivotal to me in my journey in emotional intelligence and in leadership. So you might, just blindside me and insult me later in this podcast. I can choose to get really upset about it, right? I told you that in confidence, Dave. Or I can pause and say, well, I don't want to show up bad, on the podcast. So maybe I'll respond politely. That's that ability to be one, self-aware. And then the second part of that is actually self-regulating the response. And those are the first two pillars.
And those really go together. And so the third one,
Now, the third one I think is in a little bit of a different space, and I'm not an emotional intelligence expert. In fact, I'm not really an expert on leadership in general, but I enjoy talking
but
about it.
we're picking your brain, and you're a smart guy, and that's why you're on the show.
Thanks. Right, and not too bad in the eyes, hopefully. So the third one is social awareness, right? That's your ability now to look externally and be aware of how, like, essentially context, social cues from other people that you're interacting with. So it's
Okay.
not just enough to understand your emotions. You need to be trying to pick up on other people's emotions and how those emotions are being presented and how they speak, their facial expressions, right?
Hmm.
What they're saying and what they're not saying. And that takes a lot, right, to be able to do that effectively. That's that social awareness. That's the third one.
The
So
fourth.
the fourth then is that relationship management. It's your ability to manage those external relationships that you have with those individuals and to some degree that they have with each other. And you can see as we start to talk about these, right, it builds on complexity. I would argue each of these different pillars or steps that we talked about is a little more challenging than the last.
I think the old school stereotype of a boss is, I make the decision, we do it my way, I don't want to hear from anybody. But that doesn't fit that pattern that you just gave us, that four steps.
That's correct. Yeah. And that old way still exists as a leadership style, right? That'd be more of an authoritarian leadership style. You might be subscribing to the theory that workers are lazy and they don't want to get your job done, right? The theory X versus theory Y leadership type of study. And it doesn't fit though with emotional intelligence, right? And so I am trying to sell you on a different way that we need to lead and show up to be effective. And it's not a new agey kumbaya thing, right? Oh, this generation just wants to, be softer. I do really believe it leads to us showing up and getting better results out of the teams that are following us.
If people are happy and feel involved, I know for myself, I want to work harder and work better. And it sounds like that's kind of the philosophy that you're talking about is someone who is aware of the people that he works with and people who work for him and maybe tailoring some of that leadership to that staff.
Absolutely. I mean, that's the whole purpose of the four faces mentality is you are tailoring to the situation to the staff. And I'll say this right now. I think it's harder. It's harder work to do that than just to say, here's my directive, follow it. Right. It's easier to say that. You don't have to have all that emotional intelligence. You don't have to
Mhm.
be regulating yourself. It is harder. I'll say that, but I do believe the investment is worth it.
Okay, so I kind of already opened the door up to the four faces of leadership, and that was kind of the center of your presentation that I saw in Sacramento. So, what are the four faces? And let's go through each one individually and see what they mean.
Yeah, let's get into it. I mean, this is something I've been thinking about for a while, right? I gather you've been thinking about this podcast for a while. You started it. I've been thinking about this leadership talk for a while, and I'm a big runner, so I'll go on runs, long runs. And this originally started because of my experience leading these student-led competitions, these volunteer organizations like
Mhm.
ASCE, like CWEA. And I've been thinking, okay, this is a way that I've been showing up as a leader. And this is a framework. That's all this is really. It's a framework on how you think about your interactions with your followers, depending on the situation and the context. So the four phases, nothing groundbreaking. I think all these components are out there in books, in literature, in blogs, but the combination of them, I have yet to see all four of these put together. Those four,
So
those
this is
four things,
something.
yeah.
This is actually something that you came up with based on your research,
Yeah, and all these individual components exist. I'm just kind of gluing these four pieces together,
right?
right? So it's leading from the front, leading from the back, leading from the side, and leading from the pack. And yes, it does have a sing-song rhyme to it, which makes it a little more catchy, right? I've seen leading from the front and back commonly put together. I've seen leading from the front, back, and side in some of this horse leadership books and practices that are out there. Leading from the pack is something that exists as well. John C. Maxwell has a great book called 360-Degree Leader. That is
Yep.
exactly what I'm talking about when I talk about leading from the pack. But gluing all four of these together in a framework, I think, is very useful because all four, I would argue, you can slide in and out of.
Okay, so let's go over the four and then see how they all work together. Leading from the front, what does that look like?
So leading from that front is that you said the word earlier, right? It's that general. It's the person who's charging in and showing how it's done. You're leading by example. That's leading
And it
from the
may be
front.
that larger than life kind of person, the head of a CEO of a company or something.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, if you've been watching, some of these older movies, you see that general charging in. I was talking about
Yeah,
during my presentation, how I watched 300, and it's the king that's leading the charge, right? But
right.
it can be the CEO who is stepping into the boardroom and is just demonstrating, right, that prowess or that leadership, that's setting forth the vision. I'd like to think of it as people who are task doers, right? So maybe you're a
Hmm.
project manager, and you need something done a certain way, and you maybe have an inexperienced team, a newer team, or it's just so important that you get this done the right way because there's very low room for error. That might be leading from the front where you actually kind of are showing everyone else. And it's not just doing the work, it's doing the work with the intention that your followers are watching you, and they're being inspired by what you're doing. And you're trying to inspire them to do that.
I would say that that sounds like it potentially could be dangerous because you can also take that nobody else can do this. I'm going to do it all myself, which that doesn't help anyone either.
You're 100% correct, Dave. And I think that's why leveraging different styles is so important. People who just lead from the front very quickly could fall into the trap of micromanaging or just doing it all themselves. And then you're not building up that competency in your team.
I think that, and when you talked about the four faces, I think I like that you weren't saying you're one or the other. That these actually can be used in different situations with different people. So one person can be using all of these leaderships, or two or three of them, and be an effective leader.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that
So
that's the point.
yeah, number two is leading from behind, which sounds really strange at first. At first time I heard that.
Yeah, yeah. No, leading from behind, leading from the back, it's the inverse of leading from the front, right? An example that I gave, and I love it because I'm a Boy Scout, I'm an Eagle Scout. So we did a lot of hiking. If
Yeah.
you There you go, yeah. And it's not showing because you got to get that right angle,
Two
but
Eagle Scouts here together.
yeah, we got a nest. Um, but if you've gone hiking, you put your strongest hiker in the back, right? And that's what leading from the back really is you're playing cleanup, you're being able to sweep where you need to step in. It's allowing you to observe and act for what your team needs you to do. So that's what leading from the back is in a
I think
nutshell.
you used the example of a shepherd, that a shepherd, is not in the front of his flock because uh, he's generally behind them, making sure they stay in line and go where they're supposed to go, giving them direction.
Yeah, it's a perfect example because you wouldn't
Yeah.
think of any of these sheeps being the leader. It's the shepherd that's the leader, but you're right, leading from the back.
Yeah, interesting. Now, what about the person in the middle, in the pack? What what is that kind of person, and how does that leadership work?
Yeah, leading from the back, I think, requires the highest level of emotional intelligence. It is usually a style you're using when you have the least amount of control or power. So, leading from the pack, I like to think of these people a lot of times if they're doing it organically without intentionally thinking about leading from the pack, right? These people would be the natural born leaders. These are the people who are stepping up when they're needed. If we go back to that hiking analogy, right? This could be if you're on a hike with a big group, it's that person who's looking around and seeing that their peer is running low on water or tired. They're speaking up saying, hey, like maybe we should slow down, right? They're not actually assigned to be the leader, but they're showing up in that capacity. It requires you to be able to lead up, right? So you might have to like lead up to your supervisor. It also requires you to lead down and lead side to side with your peers. People who might not be willing to just accept what you're telling them because maybe they're vying for a position or maybe they don't feel the need to respect you right away, right? So leading from the pack is really doing that more so when you don't have that functional authority.
I would think that would be difficult. I've heard this from numerous people that I've worked with who have gone from being one of the guys to getting a promotion, and now they're a manager, and they feel like that's a tough position for them to be in because they can't be one of the guys anymore and be effective, at least in any case I've ever seen. I don't know what your thoughts are on that.
That's true. With the new title comes a little bit of isolation, comes some loneliness. And you still might be leading from the pack, but your pack looks different now, right? So when you were one of the guys, you could lead from the pack there too. You could be working with a crew that has a job to do, and maybe you're stepping up just a little bit more and saying, you know what, let's go the extra mile. You say, oh, there's a little piece of trash on the ground on our site. Let's just pick it up, right? Whereas the status quo might be that's not my job. I get paid the same whether I do this or not. Leading from the pack might be inspiring other people to show up better. That same leadership from the pack, though, might have gotten you promoted. And now you have to use a different leadership style for your old crew. You'll have to lead from the front to demonstrate your competency, right? Showing that you know how to
Mhm.
do it, that you can do this. You might have to lead from the pack to build up new leaders, right? So you're not rubbing people the wrong way by just telling them what to do. But now you need to lead from the pack with all the other supervisors and middle managers that are in your group because you have a new boss, right? You have a direct line to the next rung up. So now you're leading from the pack, but your pack's different.
Interesting. Interesting. Hadn't even thought of that. Now, and then another one that I scratched my head at when you mentioned it at the conference was leading from the side. That sounds counter to what I think a leader being. But I think your explanation was great. So I'll let you explain, what does leading from the side mean?
Yeah, leading from the side is the last one, saving the best for last. It's the coach, right? So this is someone
Uh,
who is removed from the team. Leading from the side, again, all this is contextual, right? It's specific to the situation. This is a style that's most effective, or perhaps something you need to do when you're interacting with a group that you're not with in the entire step of the journey. right? So if you're in an organization that's matrixized where you're delivering projects, maybe you're an executive who is overseeing multiple projects. You might be dipping in and out of different teams. So you need to take on that coaching mentality to coach the project managers because you can't be there day to day. Maybe you're only there once a month or once a quarter to check in. You need to go lead from the side because you can't set the example every day. You're not allowed to lead from the front. You can't lead from the back because you don't have optics on them day to day, right? You don't have the ability to intervene when needed. So now you need to take on this coaching mentality. The best example is coaching a team, right? That's leading
Yeah.
from the side. You see that.
And so there are only so many leaders out there when we talk about a company. Most of the people are the worker bees. So, how does someone like that, who's just middle pack or a worker, can they benefit from these types of leadership philosophies, or whatever we want, the faces of leadership?
It's a good question. I mean, I think so, but I'm passionate about leadership just because, again, just because you're not a leader right now doesn't mean you won't be a leader in the future, right? Just because you don't think you even have the capacity to lead right now doesn't mean you can't learn the skills, the behaviors, right? And the emotional intelligence competencies to do that down the road. I think it's a really, David, a matter of desire. Do you want to be a leader, right? Is this something that you want to strive for? If you don't want to do that, you don't need to. But I think employing these strategies and thinking about the world through this lens will make you more successful in your day to day, right? In your job, but also
Mhm.
make you more successful in your personal relationships.
Yeah, we've talked about that a couple times already. But even if you're not in a leadership role, learning leadership with your family, and especially that emotional intelligence, boy, is that important.
Mhm.
So, if I'm a leader or if I'm a worker that's just using some of these philosophies we talked about, combining them, how do I know when the appropriate time to lead from the front or from the back or the side or in the pack? How do I read that and how do I learn that?
Yeah, I give a couple examples in the talk, or I gave a couple examples in the talk. I've given a couple examples now, but leading from the front, I'll just summarize it, going marching through them. Leading from the front would be you need to set an example. You need to inspire people to do something that maybe they are afraid to do or don't want to do. If we're going back to that hiking analogy, if you're crossing a dangerous stream, right, with running water, maybe you see the path forward that you need to take. We got to have a little bit of courage to step on that log. That's where you would need to lead from the front, right? Because if
Mhm.
you lead from the back there's a high chance that someone is not as capable as you. They fall into the river, right? Or maybe no one wants to go at all. So leading from the front would be effective there. Leading from the back is when you have the ability to allow people to grow and you want to let people grow on your team. I think leading from the back is one of the best strategies to grow other leaders because you're allowing other people to step up, right? And take ownership of things. So that's when I would use leading from the back. You want to be more people centric. You want to develop your people, and you have the space and tolerance to allow people to make some mistakes, and you have the space to jump in and correct it. That's when I would lead from the back. I think leading from the back also is really something that can make the job more satisfying for your crews if you're supervising people or your direct reports because people want to, have some creativity in their job. People want ownership. And if you're just
Mhm.
leading from the front and taking ownership over everything, what's left for everyone else? Um, Leading from the side, that coaching, I think anytime you're in a mentor mentee relationship, that's when you might want to lead from the side, right? So that's when I would employ being the coach. And leading from the pack is everything in between. I think leading from the pack is something you're going to slide in and out of depending on your relationship with everyone else. So again, when you don't have much functional authority, when you got a lot of peers and there's no clear leader, you're going to have to employ this leading from the pack mindset, which again, that 360-degree leader book by John C. Maxwell does a great job summarizing.
So, yeah, I was going to say, how do if somebody's listening to this and this is all new to them, and they're like, these are things I want to develop, but it's not something you just turn a switch on, and how do you learn these things? Is it reading books like John Maxwell, or um, is it getting a mentor? What are ways that somebody who's new to leadership and these philosophies can say, okay, this is how I start going down that road to become a leader.
Man, I wish I had a book that I could just point to, but yeah, I just gave the talk. There's nothing you can
Yeah.
download right now.
Yeah.
I would look up though online, leading from the front, leading from the back. If you do a search on that, there will be articles and blogs about this. And that'll be a nice introduction there. I really highly recommend those starting on this journey to read Emotional Intelligence 2.0 or something similar to that. Any emotional intelligence. If you want to employ these leadership styles, it's my take that you need to have a really high emotional intelligence. You asked, how do I know when to show up and what leadership style to use? First, you got to be able to assess the situation and understand what the people around you are feeling and what they need from you. And I think if you're not operating on a very high level in terms of emotional intelligence, you're not really setting yourself up for success to employ these leadership styles to begin with. So you got to go to the fundamentals.
I'm curious. You're obviously younger than I am, but I've seen over the last 15 or 20 years, just our society has changed pretty dramatically. What's your thought about the status of leadership in general, whether, from the highest levels down to, the local community? Do we have a dearth of leadership? Are there problems with leadership, or are we on the right track, or is it all over the place?
This is such a good question. I'm an optimist. So I think we're on a track, and I think we have the ability to get onto a better track. There are leaders out there, and very successful leaders, that are toxic leaders, right? These are the types of leaders who have followers. They're very inspirational to those followers or influential to those followers, but it's maybe not to the betterment of society. That's what you call a toxic leader. That's a leadership style in itself. You have other types of leaders like ethical leaders, servant leaders, right? But if we get back onto the track of like just effective leaders that are not harming people, whatever you call that, that exists still today too. I don't think you see a lot of that in social media or in the news because it's not as flashy, maybe, right? But these people exist. I mean, if you as an individual aren't seeing people like this in your life, it'd be pretty tough to go by day. And it is tough right now. But I see these people show up in my day to day life. They do exist. And I think part of what I'm hoping to communicate to people with this 4 phases of leadership talk is getting back to effective leadership that serves others, not just ourselves.
Have you thought about writing a book or an article, or is that something that you see down the line?
Yeah, this talk kind of kicked me into gear. So I am working on something called Involuntary Leadership, which would be a very short book at that, aimed at volunteer leaders who are in these voluntary leadership roles. Just talking about how you get engaged with these types of voluntary organizations, the 4 phases of leadership framework, and then how you keep things going for generations to come. Because something unique about these volunteer roles is you go in and out of that leadership, right? So it's not just enough to think about effective leadership, but you also need to be thinking about how you grow the next generation of leaders. So something I'm
Yeah.
working on, nothing to plug yet, but I do
Right.
I do think about spreading the good news.
And I want to give, I kind of asked this question earlier, but for someone who's watching this, and, I work with people and I've worked with people who they're fine where they're at. They don't want to be a leader, and that, no one's obligated to be a leader. But for people who are like that, that maybe they've made it this far into the talk. I don't have a family at home. Who am I going to lead? I honestly, I feel these points are still important, and I get the feeling you do too. What would you say to a person like that? That's just, leadership's not on their goals, and maybe home life doesn't really give them an opportunity to show much leadership. Do you still think it's important for those types of people to kind of learn some of these things that you've been talking about?
Yeah, I'm not a salesman, and if I were, I wouldn't be a pushy one. But I will say, if you've made it this far, you're curious, right?
Yeah.
You want to learn, and learning about any topic is going to make you better. It's going to make you a more complete, well-rounded person. You don't have to go all in on leadership. You don't have to dedicate your life to learning about it. You don't have to set out on a path where I'm becoming the best leader or bust. I think learning about these topics, though, reading a popular book that's out there, maybe it's Brene Brown, you're listening to her podcast. I think dipping your toe in and seeing what you might learn is a nice thing to try. You might be surprised. You might take away some things that'll just make you a more effective in your life generally. even if you choose to not try and lead with those skills that you acquire.
Great advice. I'm looking forward to involuntary leader. When
Involuntary leadership. Now that I put it out there, I
leadership,
guess I have to do it, right? You can bug
you
me if you
have
don't
to.
see it.
And I'm assuming you'll keep talking on the circuit, so to speak, on this.
I'm a big wastewater guy. We didn't get to talk about that at all, but I could talk your ear off
Well,
about wastewater. You'll
we
see
still
me.
have a little
Yeah.
bit of time. If I- how does this leadership role fit into, you're at East Bay Mud, and people who are not wastewater people may not know what that means. So, what is East Bay Mud?
Right. East Bay Mud is the East Bay Municipal Utility District. We serve water and wastewater customers here in our service area in Oakland, California, beautiful Northern California. Water side's about 1.4 million people. Wastewater serves about half of that. And I'm on the wastewater side, but I'm really involved in the California Water Environment Association through that job. And we have a leadership committee. So you'll see me on the leadership circuit through organizations like CWEA.
And why is leadership important in wastewater? Because I talk to a lot of people. That's part of my job. I'm also in the wastewater business, and most people don't think about what they do. They just flush it and let it go. I know you're a leader at work, but you also need to be a leader as an organization. I know my boss is very passionate about letting people know what we do and why it's so important. And I'm assuming that East Bay Mud is the same way.
Oh, yeah, definitely. Here at East Bay Mud and other agencies across the US, right, we're providing a very vital service that society needs. And every day you might wake up, you flush your toilet, right? It flushes the same unless you're doing something wrong with your toilet. But you might be paying higher rates, right? Because costs are increasing for materials, for labor, what have you.
Hmm.
When I work here day in, day out with my peers and my coworkers, people are showing up as their best selves, right? We take it very seriously that we are doing a public service and we need to be responsible with the ratepayers' money. So as we start to develop as leaders for these organizations, I think that's important because we're inspiring all those around us to go from maybe you're giving it 95%. If you listen to John Wood, he doesn't believe you can go above 100. And you're going from 95% every day to 97%, right? And that
Hmm.
2% multiplied across 2,000 employees, that makes a difference. And so I take leadership very seriously because I take my job very seriously. And I think just squeezing a little bit more can go a long way, especially when multiplied over large organization and all the organizations across the US, right? If we're all showing up 2% more every day, just imagine what we would do.
I think I'm not a big follower of her, but David Goggins uh, will talk about that. When everybody else is given 10, you're given 11. When you do, 20 push-ups, you do 21 push-ups. That kind of, just one more. And like you said, that even that incremental amount can make a huge difference.
Yeah, that's Atomic Habits, another great book I'd recommend to people, right? Just
Yeah.
about going that little bit extra every day. It does add up.
That's awesome. Max Armenta, hey, is there a place that people can get a hold of you, or through the CWEA?
Yeah. You can follow me nowhere because I don't have social media. I probably
Okay,
should. But you can always search me, Maxwell Armenta. I'm very active in the California Water Environment Association. I connect with people on LinkedIn. Always happy to chat. I love talking over coffee if you're local to the Bay Area, or I'm happy to respond to you via email or a LinkedIn chat if you want to talk more about leadership.
awesome. Max, I'm so glad we had this time to talk about the four faces of leadership. I think it's great. And I think I encourage you to keep pursuing that side of your career. I know that wastewater is your main gig, but I think you have a talent here, and I encourage it. I enjoy talking with you, and wish you the best.
Thanks, Dave. Appreciate it. I'm looking forward to listening to more of your podcasts too, by the way. It's been fascinating.
Thanks so much to Max Armenta from East Bay Mud talking about the four faces of leadership. We appreciate you tuning in. Make sure you subscribe. Hit that subscribe button. Hit it a bunch of times. Tell all your friends about it, and we'll see you next time.